My name is Brian Kellerman. I'm the Chief Quality and Safety Officer at Kellerman Consulting. And in this discussion, in this webinar, we're going to be focusing on quality management systems and specifically ISO 9001. For any of you, obviously the name of this presentation is Integrating ISO 9001. So for any of you that have not yet implemented an ISO 9001 program, hopefully you're going to get some value and kind of understanding some of the key concepts of an ISO 9001 program. However, for those of you that already have a quality management system, whether it's ISO 9001 or otherwise, we should be able to get into some really good detailed discussions of quality principles that will be valuable for old hat or folks that are new to quality systems. Quality management obviously is something, as a person who is professionally helping folks with either safety or quality systems, is a huge passion of mine. And so getting to discuss these systems is something that I really enjoy doing. And I'm hoping through this discussion that we can cover topics that are going to focus you as the listener on parts of your operation that makes sense and really can lead to some real improvements. One of the things I want to start with an ISO 9001 or quality management system specific to the 9001 setup, it applies to both products and services. And this is really, really crucial. So we're going to talk about operations. When we talk about operations, we may be talking about a physical factory or a place where processing is done, but we can also be talking about an operation in which there are no physical actions, but only the servicing of people, so call centers or doing IT, things like that. Regardless of whether there are physical or practical services being provided, how we approach monitoring and how we approach documenting a quality system is equally important and very, very valuable if we want to make meaningful improvements and see a very strong organization and ultimately a set of operations that are satisfying. I do want to mention while we're getting started, my favorite part of these webinars is the interactivity that we get to have for those folks who are here. So there's a chat function. Phoebe has mentioned in the chat function that if you have any questions, if there are things that you would like specifically addressed, I will stop what I'm doing and we can look into those concepts specifically as we go through. So I do have prepared slides and we'll go through these concepts. However, at any time you are welcome to prompt me to address anything specific. As we look at the topics that we're going to go over today, we are going to review parts of the ISO 9001 manual. So for those of you who are familiar with ISO 9001, there are sections 4 through 10. The first 3 sections of the ISO manual are really explanatory. They don't actually have the rules. The rules really start in section 4, which is context of the organization, and they go through section 10, which is the improvements section. So we're going to touch on all of those things, or at least mention those sections, and we'll tie what we our through line through each of those things. But the thing that I really want to touch on is something that I call key quality measurements, KQMs here. For anyone that's familiar with total quality management or first pass quality, we're really going to be looking at some of those concepts through this key quality measurements. And we will look carefully at what those measurements are, what they should be, and how they tie into the quality management system. Those measurements are crucial. What we find helping folks integrate into a 9001 program, or really any quality or safety program, is confusion around what record keeping is most important for a quality system. Some of you know we do work at our business at Kellerman Consulting, also on the food side. And when it comes to food, there are regulatory requirements. So the government will come in and tell you what is critical for safety, and there are very clear rules for that. for any of you that are not in that business, if you're in the quality business or industrial business or a service provider that has quality involved, it can be very confusing to understand, like, what should I be measuring here? So we want to touch on that. And we're also going to touch on key performance indicators. Now, KPIs are something that I've given webinar presentations about, and I've done videos. And if you go to our website, the videos that we have are free. So if you're interested more in the key performance indicators, we do have an expansive amount of information about that. As we look at it today, we're going to try to tie these key quality measurements, which are going to be done in operations on a regular basis, to our key performance indicators. I'm guessing many of you have KPIs. Oftentimes I hear people say, oh, I've got so many KPIs. We're going to talk about how those things work together. And for those of you who have KPIs, you'll know that those are not necessarily things that are measured every day, but rather a summation of a period of time where we are looking for trends, big picture for the company. And if we can tie those key quality measurements that are done on a regular basis to these key performance indicators, which are much more broad and long-term measurements, what we're going to find is that we can really drill in and get good control over the essence of what quality is in our business. And it's such an important opening, or at least a pathway to improvement. So we're going to take those KQMs, the key quality measurements, and the KPIs, and we're going to look at them throughout the framework of ISO 9001. We're going to specifically look at SOPs and see where these measurements would tie directly into SOPs. We're going to look at traceability and calibration of measuring devices. Again, for a ISO 9001 program, what a measuring device is and what calibration is, and traceability is a little different, especially for service providers. Those concepts are a little bit more abstract. So we'll try to touch on that. We'll certainly try to use more physical concepts, like in factories. It's a little easier to understand those things. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the sort of capstone actions of a quality management system, the internal auditing and the management review, and how we utilize those key quality measurements and the key performance indicators as the sort of entry point in performing those actions, the internal audit and the management review. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to drill in a little more specifically into these key performance indicators and key quality measurements. As I mentioned, the key quality measurements are going to be things that we look at on a daily basis, and we want to talk about how we measure those. Key performance indicators are generally a collection of data that is compiled either on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis. And those both of those measurements, both the key performance indicators and the key quality measurements, are going to be bellwethers for us within operations, within our quality program, to determine how tight we have a control over what we're doing. The key performance indicators are generally utilized by senior management. So they're generally presented to the top of the company. Certainly, depending on the way your operation functions, you may have all staff meetings or big presentations to everyone to try to build that culture of quality by sharing that information with everyone. The key quality measurements, those are generally going to be up for those of you that have like TV screens in operation. They may be presented in real time to the workers on the floor. If you have those, for those of you who may not be thinking about those types of systems, that's what we like to see. Outward presentations within operations ongoing of these key measurements. So when we're looking at where would we start for key quality measurements, for those of you who may have a good idea of what those are, if you want to put those in the chat, those are always great as suggestions. I'm going to suggest places to think about if you are unclear about what would be key as far as quality measurements in a system. So depending on the nature of what a facility does or what an operation does, for physically building things or for providing services. To determine the key quality measurement, we first really need to start at what can be measured. So when I'm thinking about a bank, for example, having loans or bank accounts available to customers, a key quality measurement is probably going to be the functionality, the ability of people to access that account in a timely manner. So logging in and seeing what the current accurate accounts are going to be. And so it might be a measurement, might be the time it takes to log into that account. Or it may be a random sampling of who is available to get those, access to their accounts, and making sure that percentage is, let's say, 99.9%. If we're thinking about an operation that is actually building things, if we have a laboratory in an operation, or we have a sampling and testing piece of the facility, any of those measurements are probably going to be really good places to start for key quality measurements. So where we have folks that are building electronics, either the proof of the load that is created by that, or the circuit board functionality, doing a boot up test and making sure that an operating system shows up immediately upon starting up operations. There are sometimes things like high pot tests. Those are a little more safety and ancillary to electronic systems, but those could be key quality measurements if we have very simple electronics. So when we think about what those KQMs are going to be, those key quality measurements, we're really focusing on immediate actions within operations. So those are things in which the quality assurance department should be able to liaison with operations directly and get real-time information. And again, the focusing on the most crucial aspects of the product and service offered is probably going to be, hopefully it should be very apparent. If it is not, if you're unclear as to what the crucial part of the service or the product offering is, that is definitely something that should prompt management meetings or operational meetings to really get input from the folks that are actually building and measuring, or building and testing product, to determine where we either are seeing breakdowns, failures, or where we are seeing the most crucial aspect of operation to get the outcomes we're looking for. Separately of that, as we move to KPIs, which are the key performance indicators, we are looking for outcomes over a longer period of time. So over the course of weeks or months. And usually those are going to be results of our product or service that we can measure against a longer term standard. So one of the things that we commonly see would be things like customer complaints over millions of dollars, or customer complaints over thousands of units. And as those measurements stretch out over a long period of time, we can have a confirmation that those measurements that we're seeing in operation are showing up in conformance over a long enough period of time for things that have already been out into the world. So things we've already sold, services that we've already offered. Once we establish these KQMs and KPIs, so once we have real-time information that we are getting on a daily basis, confirming that folks are doing their jobs, that the instructions are clear, trainings are clear, and when we make measurements, they are within specification, and we can tie them to long-term analysis that our outcomes out in the marketplace match the expected outcome because we are in conformance on a daily basis, we now have two movable parts in our quality system that we can use to look within the larger ISO 9001 program to determine if in fact we have a truly strong ISO program. The last thing I want to say for this slide, and it involves errors. So when we talk about these key quality measurements and key performance indicators, one of the most important aspects of them is that when we have errors, when there are non-conformances, and for any folks that have worked with me in the past, one of the things that I really like to point out is that there are always errors every single day in a functioning business. The minute that human beings engage in activities, if there's more than one, we can expect errors to occur on a every few minutes, every few hours, and the folks that proclaim that they work in operations that don't have errors generally are just failing to think about what those errors really are correctly, instead of actually working in a perfect operation. And I've certainly never seen a perfect operation. When it comes to these KQMs and KPIs, one of the things that's so important about each of these designations is that where we see errors in either of them, it should trigger an immediate reaction. So it should trigger an immediate report on what the error was, what the nonconformance that occurred was against either the quality measurement or the performance indicator. There needs to be a corrective action and there needs to be a preventive action. And again, I have spent a significant amount of time on videos and webinars talking about corrective actions, preventive actions, and how to document nonconformances. Here, we only want to say that if you have established quality measurements that are crucial and performance indicators that are critical for your operation, if you find errors in them, it becomes obvious that these need to be documented with those nonconformance reports, corrective actions, and preventive actions. So Seneca is from French Bread is asking if there's a way to get a copy of this video after or the PowerPoint. Absolutely, yes. We will be presenting this after the fact. So there's no need to scramble through or making notes. We'll definitely make sure that this comes out. Okay, so where we have these KQMs and KPIs, the measurements in operation, the performance indicators, before we jump into the sections of a quality assurance program or ISO 9001, the first questions we want to ask, and this really is separate of any ISO considerations, but rather focuses on any quality program. We need to first think through who is tracking the quality measurements in operations every day. So whether that's going to be operators as they go, are they going to be filling out information? Are there going to be supervisors that are getting reports from operators? Are we going to have a separate quality assurance department doing it? Now, I will tell you that when I think through of the operation in my mind, the thing that I really love to see, and I have seen this in a few quality programs, are documentation that follow the entire operation and are passed forward through a series of activities. When I have seen that in operations, I usually see really incredible quality data collection. Whether or not an organization that has done that has specifically identified any one of those spots as a key measurement, or whether they just take the entire activity as being a need to pass forward quality documentation, I do love to see that. In service providing operations, it's a little bit harder to do that. There's talking to people providing a service is generally a little more informal than constructing objects, manufacturing. So getting those pass-through documents can be a little more challenging to achieve something like that. But I do love to see the careful tracking step-by-step in a quality management system. Regardless, if we're going to identify a key measurement, then we need to know who's tracking that. When it comes to the key performance indicators, those higher level designations, often those are done at the C-suite level or at management. Either the plant manager or a quality manager will do it. However, that is not necessarily a requirement. It is what is required is that we understand who has that responsibility and that those people really understand what they're measuring and why and how it ties into the larger quality system. And then to go along with that, once we know who's doing it, how often are we going to review these measurements or the indicators? Now, for a key quality measurement that's in operation, it could be reviewed every single day. And certainly if we're doing pre-shipment review or if we're doing end of service surveys, we may get immediate feedback from certain aspects of the quality system. Like, did we perform the function correctly? Are the people who are receiving our service or product satisfied? In an ISO program, that's of course required, but in any quality system, we may be asking that. If we're measuring specific aspects of operation that we deem to be key, so if we have our key quality measurement, that may not need to be reviewed as part of every single day of operation. We may go weekly or monthly assessments of those things. And that's certainly going to be relative to what operation feels is a frequency that will really be meaningful for them. With KPIs, as I mentioned, usually those are going to be monthly or quarterly, but depending on the KPI, depending on the performance indicator, and if it is something that is absolutely essential and cannot be missed in order for functionality, it could be something that is reviewed every single week. There really are no rules for that. But if we know who is tracking it and we know how often we're going to be reviewing these things, it is going to force us into a structural situation where we are constantly reevaluating how we're doing as an organization. And those reviews, whether they're official reviews for production or management, or whether they are simply a way for all of the participants in the organization to understand their activities and how they're doing it, it really is just such an incredibly strong foundation for a quality system. To go along with that, where and when results are presented, as I mentioned, they can be put up on TV screens. KPIs generally are not presented in that manner, in my experience, not directly in operations all the time, but certainly quality measurements should be potentially done in real time, or again, and they might be in a weekly report. But we should have a set understanding of how frequently we want to present that to everyone. It shouldn't be something that's sporadic. It shouldn't be something that we start doing and then allow to slip. If we are going to focus on really intense measurements and performance indicators as a driver of our quality system, knowing how we want that information to be relayed is almost as important as the collection to begin with. Lastly, as I mentioned, customer feedback. Are the people who are receiving the service or the product, are we able to see that the measurements and the indicators we have are related directly to the feedback? That's a really good capstone, and it does tie into our requirements for ISO 9001. Before we jump into the 9001 part of this presentation, I just want to say for the quality measurements, here I have a very simple batch record form that would be representative to get you folks thinking about what a quality measurement might be if we don't already have quality records in place. So here we have amongst the most basic version of that. So it would be a recording of an inputted material, lot code, how much we have, and how it relates to the product or service. In this case, it'd probably be a product that we're making. If we had something that was crucial, if it was critical, we would have to have one of these records in place. And whether it's a written record on a piece of paper, whether it's a tablet, it really is not going to be something that is, you're not limited in how you are going to record it, but something that is a key quality measurement needs to have some kind of form or record attached to it. If it doesn't have a recorded action or recorded measurement, then you probably don't have an effective key quality measurement. So again, if we have lab works, if we have lab workers and we have a laboratory in which testing is being done, those probably are being recorded. And so those obviously would be a great place to start and think about whether they are key or whether we're looking at ancillary information. But if we haven't yet done it, this is a thing to start with and to consider as you go. So with that introduction to key quality measurements and key performance indicators and sort of thinking through the two fixes in a quality system, let's jump into ISO 9001 and sort of that framework and think through how these two different types of measurements tie directly into a ISO program. I'll remind folks, we don't put the ISO 9001 book up. The ISO framework, they make every single entity purchase a book, and they are quite strict on how that information is relayed. So we are going to discuss the parts of it. I do highly recommend, if you are going to pursue ISO 9001, please go out and buy one of those books, because you really need that as part of development of the program. The way that most people approach ISO 9001, it's not the most difficult program to run as far as how they're assessed and getting through audit. Oftentimes, folks who want to integrate a 9001 program into their facility, you can go buy some templates that are generally pretty much blank, and they do go through the basic numbering system of the ISO program, and you kind of fill in the blanks as you go. I would say that where we see people taking that approach, it is things like key quality measurements and key performance indicators that don't necessarily get hit carefully. And what I want to say about ISO 9001 before we jump into each specific section is that there's really two iterations of it. And for those of you who may already have it, this may ring true in either way. The first way that we see ISO 9001 is somewhat of a, hey, we just need a certification. So somebody asked us for this and we downloaded our documents. We fill it out and just kind of, work our way through these audits once a year. And sometimes we get hit on errors, sometimes not, but it's just something that's there in the background. And where folks do it that way, it's, there's no judgment on that. However, the ability to utilize that system to really improve a business is somewhat hindered if no one really wants to do it, if it's just kind of there and we shrug it off. Conversely, for those who embrace this quality management system and embrace the ISO 9001 and really start to dig deep into how to examine operations, find these key critical measuring steps, build out training, measure things properly, make sure they understand the measuring devices and how to calibrate them, and drive towards management and improvements and embrace it deeply, the types of improvements that can be made to an organization are pretty profound and astounding. And it really does come down to how much commitment is truly made to the ISO 9001 program. So for those of you that have it, you know which one of those approaches are being taken. Obviously, I love it. As someone who does this for a living and helps folks with this for a living, I love to see the organizations that fully embrace the benefits of an ISO program, or just any quality management system. But I understand that sometimes there are just business relationships that have to be maintained. And, especially for businesses that have limited resources, you just do the best you can. We are going to talk about this, obviously, towards the second example, the really embracing the spirit of the program and fully developing it. And when we do that in an ISO program, we start with the context of the organization, which is section 4. And in section 4, what I will tell you is that frequently this gets either skipped, it gets shoved into a quality manual, and there's just a basic statement of, we do have a context of an organization. Folks will just restate the clause in the book and just say, hey, we have this. And I highly recommend, when we start to think about the context of an organization, we focus on actually creating a document that is a mirror of our business when we're starting the program. That should include what it is that we are trying to achieve through the quality program. So what the service is, what the product's offerings are. If we have key customers that are asking for this, or that we're doing this to attain a relationship, that should go in the context of the organization. Any critical suppliers should be listed in the context of the organization. And if we have external providers, so if we have co-manufacturers or people that provide a part that can, and there's really no other entity that can help provide that part, that is really important information. And even though it can be a little tedious to write that all out into a narrative, that is what ISO 9001 is really thinking about and what they are looking for. And if we do a good job on that, then it should help us identify those key quality measurements and those key performance indicators, because we can tie it into a narrative of who we are as an identity. And it does carry through for the rest of the program. So it is a indication to me right at the beginning, when I'm helping a company either develop a program like this or reviewing someone's pre-existing ISO 9001 program, if I see a kind of like skimpy or just really quick or just a restatement type context of the organization, it's going to be an immediate tell that we probably have a shallow program and that there's a lot of opportunity to add depth. And like I say, when that depth gets added, a lot of times it corresponds to really improved behavior and outcomes. As we think through key quality measurements and key performance indicators, like I say, if we can write that into directly into the context of the organization, it's probably going to help us focus on what our key quality measurements are. And when we're thinking through what our key performance indicators are, if it is tied directly to our identity, it should be very clear and clearly stated. Within that context of the organization, who we are, we move into the fifth section of the ISO 9001 program. And this is where we define our org charts and we define who leadership is. And we establish the basic parameters of how the structure of the organization is going to meet our quality requirements. So the quality policy, for example, comes from this section. When we think about the quality policy, which is a written statement that is posted up, visible for all of the employees and anyone visiting the facility, if we have a physical facility, or if we're a service provider, it may be on our website and easy to find. We should be able to put key quality measurements and key performance indicators directly into our quality policy. So for those of you who have a quality policy, I do want to quickly talk about the fact that the old way of doing quality policies, the sort of 10, 20 years ago, what ISO 9001, what most international standards asked for was a statement of commitment to the standard itself and a commitment to customers and possibly to training employees. So much like those contexts of the organizations that tend to be really skimpy and shallow, the quality policy is a huge tell. And if you have not looked at your quality policy recently, if it's something that was established a very long time ago and is just re-signed every year and reposted in the hopes that an auditor is not going to be upset about it, I have to say that key quality measurements and key performance indicators that are placed directly into the quality policy is a first step in making sure that the quality program is established throughout the organization. It's a really simple thing to do. It doesn't take much time. You're talking about adding a few bullet points, but where we can identify a specific measurement. So if we are manufacturing a product and we want to see defects at less than 1%, and we are so committed to that it makes it into the quality policy. First of all, if we deviate from that measurement, then it's going to trigger an immediate action for the entire organization. We're going to stop what we're doing. We're going to investigate why that happened, and we're going to make sure it never happens again. If we have a key quality measurement that on a daily basis is so critical that we cannot really operate or function, that we will know it's as critical if we're willing to put it in that key, in our quality policy. And if an error in those measurements is so great that we're going to stop operations for the day, we might have to take a week off and rethink what we're doing. So if we have a press in operation and the force of that press needs to be in specification in order to actually functionally get the results we want for the objects that we're making, and that thing breaks, or it is not functioning, if somebody uses the equipment incorrectly, is not properly trained on it, and we have to throw away materials because we didn't make it right. And if that ever happens, we really have a sign that there's a fundamental issue in our facility, and putting those measurements directly into our quality policy establishes for us a real need to focus on those things and to take them very seriously. And again, create a effective way of dealing with those errors when they occur. So it really elevates those things. Along with that, the roles and responsibilities around those key measurements and key indicators, if we focus on those as part of how we organize our, how we develop our organization, how roles and responsibilities are assigned, that oftentimes can clarify how we want to divvy up roles and how we want to divvy up the power sharing within an organization. Some of the other webinars we've done and the presentations, we've really talked about the difficulties in assigning leadership and how power dynamics can affect operations. Where we have critical measurements or indicators, and if we can impress upon the people in the organization just how important they are, divvying those up across different divisions of the business or different leaders in the organization, oftentimes we can really make sure that folks are working together to achieve outcomes rather at cross purposes or focusing on some of the political aspects that can be really toxic to an organization. Lastly, and this is a message that I deliver in a lot of the content we create, which is I truly believe that leadership and top leadership should be taking responsibility for both review of quality measurements and key performance indicators, that it should not be something that is delegated down through the organization, but rather a shared activity between leadership and operations. It's a real opportunity to, again, come together throughout the organization. So we can see as we're starting to bring in these things about context of the organization and leadership, where we have fixed measurements and fixed performance indicators and we elevate them, it allows us to have a focal point throughout our operations in organizational and in administrative ways, in operational ways, and in quality assurance functions that tie us all together and clarify the mind. So again, for those of you who have existing programs, if you are hearing what I'm saying and thinking, gosh, I'm not sure that we really have focal points like that, the designation of these things can really drive significant improvements in operations. So please do consider that. To go along into now, we're going to look into section 7 and 8 of the ISO 9001 program. So for those of us familiar with the ISO 9001, here we are talking about training and competency and awareness. And to go along with section 8, which is the actual operations, usually that's where we house our, our quality manual or our collection of SOPs. Those, of course, really belong in any operation, whether there are key measurements or key performance indicators that are clearly defined. SOPs are, in a lot of ways, the sort of backbone of what most folks have for an ISO 9001 program. So even in those programs where, as I mentioned, it's a little surface level for the earlier parts of the program, when we dig into SOPs, generally I do see pretty good, well-developed instructions for the way that operations go. I do like to see them posted up on the wall. I like to see them up on those monitors at workstations. But even if we just have a manual and a reference point for how folks are going to perform their job, we love to see that. And even more so, the way that trainings line up with SOPs. For organizations that don't really have a lot of SOPs, we also tend to see lax trainings because there isn't a lot of written explanations of things. So folks have not necessarily thought through in a coherent and cogent way how we want things done in a uniform manner. And without doing that, there generally is also a somewhat of an indifference to regular trainings on those things. So when we see them written down, we also see folks that are usually ready to really go back and reassess them through training and to evaluate and assess people after those trainings. To tie it to this discussion for this webinar, the KQMs and the KPIs. Here again, when we establish what the critical measurements are going to be, or the quality measurements, and we establish to our people what our key performance indicators are, I would expect to see a specific SOP for each one of those things. So if you folks have already established some of those things, but you haven't done an SOP for them, I would say as a takeaway from this presentation, consider going through and actually writing through SOPs for those. And those SOPs, again, we talked earlier about assigning responsibilities for those measurements and for the indicators. Certainly, if something is critical at a operational level each day, or is something that we're building towards as far as long-term outcomes of the system itself, there should be a written instruction of how we properly perform either the thing that we're measuring or the measurements itself. So for example, if I'm measuring in the laboratory, we talked about a press, but if separately we are manufacturing an object of a certain width and we are performing some kind of test or some kind of caliper measurement, we should have the SOP for the manufacturing of the proper width of the object and a separate SOP for measuring with those calipers. I really love to see it with pictures, obviously, where we have them in SOPs with the arrows. That's, to my mind, the easiest way to make sure that any potential employee or operator, especially if we have like temporary or contract workers, if we have instructions with pictures, I really feel strongly that they're going to be easily recognized. If we have those SOPs tied up to both the action itself and the measurement for KQMs, if we have it for the way we manage those performance indicators, as well as, if we really want to be thorough, the SOP for how someone should perform the measurement for that key performance indicator, if all of those things are lined up, now we can really coherently now point to sections 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I kind of skipped over risks and opportunities, but obviously if we have KQMs and KPIs, we should be able to dial those into and directly link them to risks and opportunity for the business. If we have the SOPs for performing and measuring, and we have trainings on those and assessments of competency, we should be able to see start to finish a coherent operational commitment to these functional concepts. So the traceability and calibrating of monitoring and measuring devices. So this also is within the operational section, section 8, where we have quality measurements. If we have instruments that actually do measurements, we obviously calibrate those. So things like calipers, things like scales, any laboratory device that takes a quality analytical measurement is something that obviously is calibrated. If it's something like a pH measurement, if it's something like a temperature measurement, then we calibrate those devices on a daily basis. Each time we use them, we calibrate them, or each day. If it's a machine that's a little more set like a scale, they may only need to be calibrated quarterly, twice a year, or annually. And that's really up to the likelihood of those measuring devices to go out of measurement. But regardless of how often we calibrate, when we are thinking about what we're measuring and how it ties into critical measurements in operations or performance indicators, we want to make sure that we all understand what those measuring devices are. We want to have it in writing how often we are supposed to calibrate those devices. When it comes to the tracing of the things we make, the services or the products. So if we're measuring them correctly and we have good measuring devices, we also need to make sure that we can trace through what we've made and tie it to those measurements. I am a very strong believer in doing very frequent traceability exercises. For those of you in operation, whether you manufacture things or a service, I really want you to conceptualize like what are the unique identifying numbers or letters associated with each action or with each thing that you make. For those of us who manufacture and have lot codes, that makes things pretty easy. If you make a service if you perform a service or make an object and you only really go by the date that you have started, and it has a defined frequency of a couple days, if you have a best by date or a use by date, if you have a contract that allows for a service in a specific amount of time as part of the quality management system, those things can be difficult to trace. And the reason why I recommend that we trace regularly is because it should be easy to do once we have a set traceability concept in place. And when we are thinking about how to trace the system, how we track a job, how we track a production run should be very clearly defined. It should, again, have some kind of quality, key quality measurements, should tie into performance indicators. So we should be able to define what those things are in a tight way. And depending on how we record them, all we need to do is confirm that our system is capable of tracking those lots, tracking that service, and how fast we can get at tracking those things can be down into 10 to 15 minutes. If understanding what a run is taking a really long time, or it's difficult to get the production records, that's a sign that we don't have a lot of careful control over our quality system. And so performing a trace exercise, even if we fail in the terms of how quickly we want to track this information down, or how we are referring to that information, if we do it somewhat regularly and we challenge ourselves properly, we should be able to more quickly find that information, shrink it down, and present it within operations and to management. Being able to perform that quickly and coherently is oftentimes a sign that our quality system is getting more structure and the functionality is stronger. We have about 5-10 minutes left. And with the last few minutes, I will leave some time for questions if folks have any, but I do want to quickly review senior management and internal audits with the time remaining, tie it back into those key performance indicators and measurements. So sections 9 and 10 of the ISO 9001 program address after the fact assessments of the quality program and whether or not we achieved the outcomes we wanted. And that is tied into two separate concepts: senior management and internal audits. And where we have senior management review that should involve senior management, it doesn't need to be a quality assurance driven investigation. We'll get to internal audits, which are quality driven investigations. Here with senior management review, we want those high level reviews. And here where we have key performance indicators, those should be really front and center of a senior management review. If we also want to tackle some of those quality measurements that are done in operations and see how they're tying to performance indicators, that would be a really important thing to focus on in a senior management review. The non-conformances, the corrective actions, the preventive actions for those measurements, both the indicators and measurements, that of course should be a part of every senior management review discussion. And between those three topics, which is the performance indicators, any connectivity to the key quality measurements, and those non-conformances, we will have, just by reviewing those, we should be able to get to a very strong discussion every time we do a senior management review. When we're reviewing KPIs, again, we want to establish how we did in meeting or exceeding all of those indicators, and make sure everyone participating understands what those indicators are, why they're in place, and what their importance is, especially if we have staff turnover, new people that are at the senior management level. Making sure that everyone understands what those are and is committed to those is absolutely essential. And that can often be a missed opportunity in organizations or as part of the management system. Lastly, with management review, any improvement initiatives should be reviewed, whether they are tied directly to the quality management, the key measurements or the key performance indicators, or they are just things that are going on in the facility as improvements or just in operations. So whether those are construction projects, whether those are adding new software, if we're automating or bringing in AI into an operations and we want to see those as improvement projects, the status of those, getting reports on where we are and when we think we're going to be finished are generally going to be really important. With internal audits in addition to management reviews. So internal audits are, of course, our quality investigation, and this ties directly into Section 9 of the ISO 9001 code. Internal audits and management reviews, oftentimes this can be quite confusing to folks because, especially in small organizations, we might have a quality manager performing both functions, especially when quality assurance has a senior management role. We want to make sure when we're thinking about key quality measurements and key performance indicators that we don't mindlessly duplicate the review. So for example, when I perform an internal audit, I need to go into my records and look at those key quality measurements. So I need to actually look at the recorded information, and I need to make sure that it's recorded properly, that there's a sign off on it, and that they are housed where expected. For the key performance indicators, I'm really looking to make sure that the measurements are up to date and have been presented to senior management or are ready to present to senior management. But I shouldn't do that as part of internal audit and then just turn around for senior management and just duplicate that. I really think if you can think through how to perform that function in two separate ways. So we have a quality assurance team for the internal audit. They should probably just be looking at the data itself and making sure it's accurate. If that's being done properly, senior management should be spending some philosophical or ideological time in conceptualizing, is this the best documentation for us to be reviewing? What are we finding about our organization through this? And trying to make sure that we have two separate ways of evaluating this information rather than just doing two quick checkoffs like, yes, they exist. Yeah, the measurements are present and they were not out of spec. Just doing that twice, I think, was a real lost opportunity. So in both of those, internal audits and senior management review, I do think that if you have embraced key quality measurements in operation and key performance indicators as overarching and long-term evaluations, those should be the starting point for an internal audit or a management review meeting, as I mentioned. And lastly, with an internal audit, I do want to say that with the purchased ISO 9001 book, with the tools that are provided with that, you should go through the entire code for the 9001 program. So starting with our measurements and indicators that are critical, then making sure that we go through the 9001 material as well is a very important function of performing a correct internal audit. So to sum up what we've reviewed over the last 50 or so minutes, the stronger the link between those operational actions, those measurements in operation, and a key performance indicator, the better we should see the line through of a quality program. So we should see a very strong program if we have that. If there's confusion of what measurements are important in operations, or if it doesn't tie directly to the outcomes we're expecting over a long term for the business, we probably are going to have confusion within the quality program itself, and there's probably going to be disconnects. For the review functions with the internal audit and senior management review, making sure that we do separate reviews of both of those functions and that they are not simply just duplications, we're just not doing it twice right before an audit, that we really have multiple approaches to how we assess this information, not just that the data is present, but also if we've picked the effective indicators and measurements, and if those things are tied to things like feedback, if the context of the organization is still represented in those things. That's really important that we achieve both of those things during our assessment. And where we have standard operating procedures and trainings that are in place, we should make sure that we have those for every key quality measurements, both the function and the way we evaluate it. The key performance indicators, or the actions that we consider to be key performance indicators, have SOPs, and also the SOP for how we establish the presentation of those indicators. So if there's a math equation or some other function that we need to establish as part of those measurements, we should have those as well. So that kind of takes us to the end of the presentation. I did want to leave the last few minutes for anyone, if there are any questions. If I brought up a concept and we would like to delve into that a little more deeper with these last few minutes, now's a great time to ask. If you are, if something comes up after this presentation and you do want to reach out, you are welcome to send us a email or give us a phone call. We're always happy to discuss these in greater detail. So I'll give it a minute or so and see if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up and let everyone go. All right, folks. It appears that there aren't any questions at this point. I hope everyone found that to be useful information. And again, if you have any quality or ISO 9001 questions you'd like to delve into with any depth, we're easy to find and would love to talk about it. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.